President Joe Biden says that the U.S. continues to push diplomacy to de-escalate Russia's buildup on Ukraine's borders, but adds that it's ready no matter what happens.
Biden also says the U.S. laid out the full nature of Russia's threat to Ukraine's sovereignty to the Security Council and continues to urge diplomacy. But he says whatever Putin decides, the U.S. is ready.
I had a productive talk last week with President Zelensky, and we continue to engage in nonstop diplomacy and to de-escalate tensions and attempt like the devil to improve security for our allies and partners and for all of Europe, for that matter. And today in the United Nations, we've laid out the full nature of Russia's threat to Ukraine's sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine, as well as the core tenets of a rule-based international order. And we continue to urge diplomacy as the best way forward. But with Russia's continuing its buildup of its forces around Ukraine, we are ready no matter what happens.
Several NATO member states are sending troops and hardware to allies in Eastern Europe as tensions with Russia escalate. The United States has put several thousand troops on alert.
And Moscow has over 100,000 troops amassed on the Ukraine border, and the West fears an imminent Russian invasion.
A show of solidarity. 4 Danish F-16 fighter jets landed in Lithuania last week to bolster NATO's air policing mission in the Baltic. Since Russia's forceful annexation of Crimea in 2014, NATO has deployed around 5,000 troops in Eastern Europe in what the alliance terms an enhanced forward presence. The US has put an additional 8,500 troops on standby.
I'll be moving U.S. troops to Eastern Europe and the NATO countries in the near term.
France announced plans to deploy hundreds more troops to Romania, while Spain, the Netherlands and Germany are also considering sending more troops, aircraft and warships. Britain has supplied around 2,000 anti-tank weapons to Ukraine and is expected to offer further deployments to NATO allies this week.
I think it's important when it comes to military deployment that we signal to President Putin that the very thing he fears, which is more NATO closer to Russia, would be a consequence of a strategic error of invading a sovereign country such as Ukraine.
NATO has no plans to deploy combat troops to Ukraine.
Those NATO troops that are in those border states are really there more for preparedness and for defensive and deterrence capability, rather than the expectation for direct conflict or direct combat.
NATO says it is responding to Russian aggression. Moscow called the response hysteria. Russia has around 100,000 troops deployed close to the Ukrainian border. Thousands more arrived in Belarus for joint military exercises this week.
NATO itself has had to respond to a new threat that Russia posed by putting additional forces into Belarus, which of course shares a border with Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania, which are NATO allies.
NATO's deployments could ratchet up tensions further with Russia's president, says Norman.
One of Putin's key demands in all of this is the drawdown of NATO troops and weaponry from those same eastern states. So the fact that there is more buildup there is going to be seen not as an act of defense, but an act of offense and provocation by Russia.
Meanwhile, the flurry of diplomatic efforts to avoid war continues. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson is due to visit Ukraine this week and hold talks on the phone with Russia's President